Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Glad you're here. We're going to jump right into the book of Hebrews, chapter number 11. I plan on getting done with chapter 11 tonight. We shall see how it goes. I had my little book next to me before I left, but I didn't bring it. It's supposed to follow me wherever I go, but my stuff don't do that. I don't know how y'all's stuff does that. Mine don't walk around, follow me. Especially my cartons. Okay. So we're in Hebrews 11, and we're in number 23. And we are talking about Moses now. So remember, we're talking about the hall of faith, or however you want to describe it. And the point the Hebrew writer is bringing up, why he's giving this big old list, is because at the end of chapter 10, you see that he is concerned, and he's trying to encourage them not to fall back, not to go back to anything that would cause them to lose their salvation. And he says, that the just are going to live by faith, and you need to be those who are considered just, and you need to live by your faith. And so he's given this big, long example in chapter 11 of people who were justified by their faith, and they lived by their faith. So the reason for chapter 11 is at the end of chapter 10 and at the very beginning of chapter 12, but we'll save chapter 12 when we get there. So that's why he's given this big old list. And so he's gone through all of these people. He's gone through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. And now in verse 23, he's on to Moses. Well, Moses' parents really is what this is talking about. Then he'll get to Moses in 24. 23 says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. All right. 10 points if you can name Moses' parents. Their names were? What's that? Okay, Jochebed is the mother. So you got 5 points. And nobody knows. Well, it's in the book of Exodus, chapter 6, so I'll make you look over there. We don't have to do it now, though. Anyways, so you get 5 points. Good job, Linda. You're leading. So this goes all the way over to Exodus. This is referring to Exodus chapter 2, all right? And you starting in verse number 1, and his parents were hiding Moses because, why?
Because of the king's orders to kill.
Okay, so the king of Egypt, which, we call Pharaoh, he had an order to put to death every son. And the king's command is found in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 22. It says, so Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born, you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. All right. So that's why they did what they did with little baby Moses. And not only did they fear God enough not to just toss their child into the water and kill him, they trusted that God was going to protect. So what did they do, actually? Do you know? They actually put him in the river. They put their boy in the river, but
it was in a basket.
Okay, they made like a little
boat.
A little ark.
Yeah.
And could you, it takes a lot of trust to put your son, your baby boy, into a little boat and just let him go down the river. It's a lot of trust in God, don't you think? Yeah, quite a lot. And so not only did they not fear the king, they feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. We'll say it like that. they trusted that God was going to protect their baby. And who knows what all kind of dangers awaited a little innocent baby couldn't fend for themselves along the Nile, right? All right, so that was his parents. I'm going to skip over the beautiful part unless you're very curious about that, but if no comments or questions about that, that's a pretty well-known story, isn't it, about what Moses' parents did. 24 says, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. 27 says, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him, God, who is invisible. Verse 28, by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Okay. So Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called son of Pharaoh's daughter. Well, that's because he knew who he was. He knew his heritage. He knew who his people really were, and he knew who his God really was. Remember, he would have been raised up around many Egyptian gods and people who weren't actually his people. And certainly he knew all of those things because, at least in part, he was raised by his mother. And if you go to Exodus chapter 2, and you can see where his mother was actually, so he goes down how does the account go? They put him in the river, and he goes down, and then he's found by Pharaoh's daughter, and then
his sister.
And then his sister was looking at everything, and
then she went and talked to Pharaoh's daughter and said, "Do you need a nurse?" Nurse.
Yeah, you need a nurse, basically. And so she runs, and she says, "Yes, go get me a nurse." And she goes and gets Moses' mother. Yeah, so Moses' mother, it all comes for a circle, and she's right back in his arms as his nurse. And it says, the child grew, and then he went to live with the princess, I guess, Pharaoh's daughter. But I think I don't think that was the last time that Moses ever saw his parents, or at least his mother, because we know that the Hebrew women they served as nurses and servants to the Egyptian women. Certainly that the Egyptian princess would have had Hebrew servants as well. So I think I don't believe that was the last time that Moses ever saw his mother. And I think the fact that he got of age and he knew who he was, and he knew his heritage, and he knew who was his people, and all of that. Okay. So Egypt, so Moses got of age, and he saw that, all right, Egypt, look how great Egypt is. They are the ones in control. They are the ones that have all the wealth. They have all the wisdom, the worldly wisdom, right, at the time. They had the power. And then you look at the Hebrew people, and who are they? They were nobody. They were the slaves, the lowly slaves. But by faith, Moses was able to see the futures of those two people were going to tell very, very different stories, right? Because God was with one people and God was not with the other, right? What do you think it means by verse 26? It says that Moses esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. What do you think that means? What is reproach? Is it good or bad? We'll start there. Okay, it's not good. It's bad. All right? If you had to put it in another word, you would say, we just wouldn't use that word, right? We don't have that word in our vocabulary. Scorn, we don't use that word much, but I think we understand what the word scorn means. Contempt. It's the idea of abusive shame. It's reproach. The reproach of Christ. And so, so what I'm asking you is, how did Moses know about the reproach of Christ? What is it? What do you think the writer, why is he saying it like this? Do you think? Okay, well, so he knew about a promise, a future promise that Abraham, the same one that Abraham knew of, and that there was going to be blessings through them. Okay.
When he wrote this, he's probably, because Christ is already coming on.
Christ is already coming on.
So in their mind, he's tying the promise that Christ is the seed, which is the promise. Because it was Abraham's seed, singular, this is the seed.
Okay, yeah. So maybe not so much that Moses actually knew of the reproach that Christ was going to go through, right? Not like that. But the Hebrew people would go through.
No, they would know that Christ, by the time the Hebrews was written.
Okay, yes.
They would know Christ is coming.
They would know. They're making the connection. And so you think the writer is making another type, anti-type going on here?
He's just putting it together for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Would it be right to say that Moses suffered for righteousness' sake? Okay. Right? God first, he put worldly pleasures, the Egyptian pleasures, he put that last, no matter what it cost him, and it did cost him a lot. And so didn't Christ do the same thing? Put God first, worldly things last, no matter what it costs. And so, yeah, so I think you're on it. The writer is not saying that Moses actually knew of Christ and he actually had some kind of weird foreknowledge about what Christ was going to go through. But his sufferings really were a type of the sufferings that Christ would go through. And the Hebrew readers, as they read this letter, they would have been like, okay, yep. And they would have easily put two and two together by what Paul is saying. Does that make sense? But he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater than the riches of, greater than the treasures of Egypt. Okay. So he looked forward to the reward too in verse 26. Moses knew he had to have knowledge of a better life that was coming, and all of his suffering was going to be worth it. Christ knew all of his sufferings were going to be worth it, right? Because the whole world would have a way to be saved because of what he went through. And every Christian who suffers for their faith, and remember, back in chapter 10, some of these, he mentioned that some of these Hebrew Christians did suffer, at least at one point. But every Christian who suffers for their faith, and every Christian does face at least some kind, every faithful Christian, let me put it like that, is going to face some kind of persecution. That's 2 Timothy 3 and verse number 12. And well, why do we go through that? Why do we keep calling ourselves Christian if it's such a hard? Because we know the same promise of a reward in heaven, right? Of a better place that we're going to, right? So the fact that chapter 10 does bring up some of these Christian sufferings, I think it makes this particular verse stand out all the more. Verse 26. Because I would imagine that what Paul's trying to do, the author of Hebrews is trying to have them, these Christians, relate their own situations to some of the things that he is writing in chapter 11. Right? And so, you know what? They went through some persecution, more of it's probably coming, and then now they're having to deal with their brothers and sisters. Some of them are trying to leave the faith and go back to a dead law, a dead faith. They're falling away. And if they stay that way, they're never going to be saved. They're never going to get to go to heaven. And so he's saying, look, they went through some sufferings. They went through some trials, but by faith, they made it through. In Moses' particular case, it was worth giving up the easy life. The easy life for Hebrew Christians would have been, let's say the Jews, let's say that they had family who did not convert to Christ. Well, don't you think that they would always be hearing that from their family? ostracized and kicked out of things because they just decided to follow this Messiah, this fake Messiah, Jesus. On top of any kind of Gentile persecution that would have came because of it. So what's the easy route to do? Well, I mean, just say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll take some more Judaism then, you know? Yeah, it's fine. I've denounced Christ, or I'll just add some of the Jewish faith in and just get off my back, you know? That's the easy route. Of course, then they lose their soul, and so the easy life is not always the best life in the end, right? Look at 27 again. It says, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. Let me ask you this. If Moses did not fear the wrath of the king, well, then why did he flee? Why did he get out of Dodge? Now, do you remember what happened? Why did Moses end up leaving Egypt and he went into the land of Midian? So do you remember what happened? Anybody want to explain to all of us what happened?
Well, he killed an Egyptian
Okay, so
because he was striking
he saw an Egyptian abusing one of the Hebrews. Moses ends up killing the Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
And he leaves because he killed the guy, right?
Right.
Actually, it says Exodus 2:15, when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh, dwelt in the land of Midian, sat down by a well. But now the Hebrew writer tells us, and he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king.
But he had faith in God. That's why he didn't fear Pharaoh.
Okay.
I think there's a timing issue here. He hadn't received the message from God until he had already left Egypt. God appeared to him in the bush and told him what he needed to do.
Okay. So you're saying he didn't have faith before he left?
He didn't have the level of faith that the writer is talking about here until afterwards.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So maybe this is not, you're saying that maybe verse 27, the forsaking Egypt is not him fleeing into Midian. That's another time.
Yeah.
When he actually had greater faith.
Yeah.
When he came back into Egypt.
Yeah, later on, when God first made him this assignment, he was reluctant to do it because he didn't have faith in himself.
Mm-hmm.
So God had to bring Aaron into the picture, and he became his backup. Anyways, at this time then, he developed a strong faith, and he chose to leave everything else and follow God's directive.
Okay. So the forsaking Egypt is not him fleeing into Midian. It's just him really just forsaking all of Egypt, all that would go along with Egypt kind of idea, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, I mean, that's what it is, then that makes sense. Anybody have any other thoughts about it? Maybe this side of the room?
Well, if he wasn't fearful, why would he flee? If he wasn't fearful of what Pharaoh would do to him, why would he flee?
That's what I was asking, but
I believe there was fear in what Pharaoh would do to him when he found out that he killed the.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Trust God, but that doesn't mean you just sit there and let things happen to you. Like the judge, I can't remember a judge saying my life, but this one sticks with me. For the guys on the roof of his house and there's a flood and a boat comes by, no, God's gonna save me. And a helicopter comes, no, God's gonna save me. And then you guys go to heaven and he's like, God why didn't you say anything? He's like, I said, I'm voting out, doctor, what do you want?
Yeah.
You don't sit there and let things happen to you, you gotta act.
Mm-hmm.
So, he ran.
So you're saying he had a level of fear, but not to the point where he was gonna disobey God to obey the Pharaoh in some way, or
I think he rejected the Pharaoh and then he chose the side of the Hebrew, didn't he? Took the part of the Hebrew instead of the Hebrew.
Yeah. Paul.
So he feared Pharaoh when he killed the Egyptian. He left. He met with God, told him what to do. He went back to Egypt to let my people go.
Yeah.
Because Pharaoh might have killed him at any time. He just didn't care. And he esteemed God more than he did the fear of Pharaoh. And he continued to pursue what God had told him to do.
Yeah.
To let my people go.
Okay.
He didn't fear Pharaoh anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Where he said in the Bible, it says, in fact, it wasn't.
Well, if you get that verse, tell us what it is. But what does 23 say about Moses' parents? Did they fear God? I mean, did they fear the king? They didn't. So we might ask, well, why did they hide their baby then?
Because of everybody else. Because people talk.
Uh-huh.
And
Well, why couldn't they just be like, God, take care of this, we trust you?
well, they prayed many hours over it, I'm sure.
Surely, yeah.
And this decision to put him in the water, you think that was just her, or she knew what was gonna happen?
Yeah.
I mean, God had great plans for Moses.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why things happened the way they did.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, so there's obviously, I don't believe there's any contradiction, but I'm just trying to get y'all to think about this little, kind of open your brains up a little bit. You got that verse?
Matthew 10:28.
Okay.
Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body.
Yeah. So Moses obviously feared, I would think he did fear Pharaoh. Like, I mean, why would you flee if you didn't? But obviously he feared God more, right? And I would say there was a level of fear with his parents as well, because they wouldn't have hid the baby if there wasn't. But, Heidi would say, well, they're just not dumb. I mean, but they hid him for a reason, but they did not fear the king so much where they were just going to be like, yes, we'll do whatever you want. Now they feared God more. And so it's right that the Bible says they didn't fear the king. It's right that the Bible says Moses didn't fear the wrath of the king. And especially if the forsaking of Moses, as Gary was pointing out, is not actually talking about Moses leaving the first time. It's just forsaking in more of a general sense. Moses forsook Egypt and everything that went with it, and he put God first. And by the time he came back, he was a man of, I would say, great faith coming in there, even with his brother doing the speaking.
I don't think he had gained the courage until God met with him.
Oh, yeah, I agree, yeah.
In the
Yeah.
bush.
Yeah.
And then he gained more courage to face Pharaoh.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true. Yeah, and actually, doesn't the verse say? I mean, verse does say he by faith he forsook Egypt. That was the reason why he forsook Egypt was because of his faith, right? He didn't forsake Egypt because of what he thought might happen to him, right? Am I seeing that right? All right, so verse 28 says he kept the Passover as well. Moses kept the Passover. This is talking about the 10th plague, which is the beginning of the Exodus, the beginning of them actually leaving. So the people by faith kept this, what do you call it, a ceremony or memorial or something, whatever we want to call it. They kept this Passover, and by doing it, they obeyed God, and they kept it not ever having heard of something like that before. You kill the lamb and you put the blood over the doorpost. I mean, don't you think that would have been an odd thing to do? If you've never heard of anybody doing that before, or you've never seen it done before, right? I think that's a lot of the point of a lot of these people in Hebrews 11, because, had Moses ever built an ark before? Has it ever rained before? I mean, excuse me, Noah? That's why you're laughing. I mean, I Noah, right? So that was, and where was Noah, right? Was he near the sea? Probably not. Had Abraham ever seen anybody raised from the dead before? Not that we know of. That's the hope. So they kept this Passover as maybe a strange little ritual of sorts, but they kept it because they had faith in God. All right. Verse 29 says, by faith, still talking about the Israelites, they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians, attempting to do so, were drowned. Right? So this is all the faith of the Israelites, the faith of all the Israelites, including Moses, of course. So on the very same day of the Passover, if you read Exodus 12, the Israelites started leaving Egypt. Very same day. 10 plague come through, and then boom, they were told to, and actually you remember reading where they were actually told to keep the Passover and get prepared, all their preparations, they were actually told to like put on their garments and right, and kind of pack up and get ready to leave, and be ready to go. That was part of the command. And so they started leaving Egypt, and as soon as they came to the Red Sea, they kind of started panicking a little bit because they got water in front of them and they got an army behind them chasing them. And so yet again, they acted upon their faith in God and in his command, which was, watch Moses part this water and you walk through it. You think they'd ever seen that before? No. And then two groups of people went into that Red Sea, and only one came out. And that's because one people went in with a faith in God, and one people went in without a faith. And the one with the faith, they got out, and the one without the faith, they stayed in it, and they perished, right? The next verse, 30, it just jumps right to Jericho. Well, what happened in between the parting of the Red Sea and going into Jericho? What happened in between there? Okay, they wandered the what? Well, where's the faith of that? Where's that at? By faith, they wandered through the wilderness, and there's a lot of stuff happened, right? So where's all that? Why does it skip over that?
They died in the wilderness because of unbelief.
Okay, so they struggled in the wilderness, huh? So there's no mention of the people's great faith. Oh, by faith they did this as they wandered through the wilderness. None of that. What's that? They complained the whole time, just about. And all of them perished, actually, except for two people. Well, all the older folks, we would say, perished, except for two. And the only mention of that time period in between the Red Sea and in between Jericho is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 3, and we already talked about that, and all of that is negative about it. They died of unbelief because of their unbelief. Yeah, just interesting. So verse 30 says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. Faith, substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. How many times have they seen walls fall down? Maybe a couple times. How many times have they seen big walls fall down? Maybe not any at all. How many times have they seen big walls fall down when you didn't even touch them? You didn't even do anything to them. How many times did that happen? By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. So now this is in Joshua chapter 6. So you can read about Jericho in chapter 6. And again, this speaks to all the faith of Israel. And it wasn't all the marching around for 6 days, and on the 7th day they marched around 7 times, and they were to blow the trumpets, and then they were to shout and then shout really loud. And so it wasn't the marching, it wasn't the shouting, it wasn't the blowing of the trumpet that caused the wall to fall down, right? Or was it?
No, their faith. Doing obedience.
It was God. What?
The obedience.
God's power caused it to fall down, right? But why did God do that? Because of their faith, which involved their obedience to God's commands, right? Verse 31, kind of still in Jericho, sort of. It says, by faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, perish with those inside of Jericho, who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. Now, we've gone to all of this big, long list of people, and this is the first what? Rahab, she is the first what mentioned? Compared to everybody else. She's the second woman. Okay, right. We would say that, I guess we would say the first, non-Hebrew, non-person of God, or belongs to the people of God, right? So this is in Joshua 2, and let me read this. Joshua 2, oh, that's before Judges. Joshua 2, verse number 9, verse 11. So she's got the spies in there. She gives them a place to stay. And then she says this in Joshua 2, starting in verse 9. She said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land. Well, how do you think she knew that? That the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Verse 11 said, as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you, for the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Well, so we could say that she believed, and everybody else in Jericho did not believe. So she definitely separated herself. And James actually mentions Rahab also. Doesn't actually mention, he's talking about her faith, but do you know what James brings up about Rahab when he writes about Rahab? Here it's her faith, and James is talking about her faith, but doesn't use that word. What does he use? You know, in James chapter 2, verse 25. What's the word that he uses? Was Rahab the harlot not justified by her works? Oh, okay. So you see there's a connection. Well, both of these are right. Both of these accounts are right. But you see there's a connection between faith and works, right? So her faith led to her physical salvation. She was physically saved. She didn't die. They protected her, right? And she had to put the scarlet cord in the window. So that led to her physical salvation, which would have led to her really being converted to the faith of the Hebrew people. And of course, she's exalted among all Israel. Now she's in this list of great people of faith. And of course, it seems that she is in the lineage of Christ, right? Some would say that's not her, but we'll say it is for right now.
First, it would have been one that I read was she married a Jew named Solomon,
Mm.
and she became the great grandmother of King David.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think that would be Boaz's father. Yeah, something like that, yeah. Yeah, so her great faith was exalted, or her name was exalted because she had great faith in God. Now, 32 through 34 says, and what more shall I say? So at this point, Paul could just keep going on and on and on and on about, with examples like this. But at this point, he's saying, okay, I got to stop. I don't have enough. For the reason I'm writing this letter, I don't, maybe he's running out of ink and paper. But basically, this would never end if he just kept on going. So he says, what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Okay, that's a lot, right? A lot of good stuff. So you have 3 judges mentioned there. A 4th judge by association. Every time we see that name, Barak, we think of the judge Deborah. Yep. And then you have 3 judges, you have a general in the armies, which is what Barak was, and you have a king, David. There's actually also a prophet. It's right to call him a prophet. And Samuel and the prophets. How many prophets do we have writings of that are actually inspired? You know? How many minor prophets are there? There's 12 minor. 4 or 5? You got Ezekiel, you got Jeremiah, you got Isaiah, you got Daniel. 4. So you have 16. So we have 16 prophets that we have writings of, and so that was all the prophets that God ever sent, right? Because we don't have any writings of the other ones, so that was we had only 16 prophets. God only sent 16 prophets. Is that right or wrong? Huh? What?
Wow.
Doesn't sound right.
It doesn't sound right. So name me one. Okay, then. Name me a prophet that we don't have a writing of, that you know for a fact was a prophet. Enoch was a prophet. Okay. Are you going to the controversial stuff already? Right? Well, that's right. And then there was that one. No one knows. No one knows any prophets that didn't actually don't have a name with their name on a book.
Elijah.
Okay, well there's Elijah. There's one. We got one, and Elisha. There's 2. You think that was it? You think there's probably more? Probably more. If you're saying that in your head, then you're right. There's quite a lot, actually. So many, many, many more prophets. Now, I'm not really going to go and get into detail about what they did. You could tell me who subdued kingdoms. Can you name anyone who is listed and who is not listed? Who was someone who subdued kingdoms? Or who is listed? Right there. David subdued kingdoms, subdued many kingdoms. Every judge that is listed there subdued kingdoms. What about work righteousness? That was just about everybody in this whole chapter. Obtain promises, everybody in this whole chapter. Stop the mouths of lions. Samson is one, yeah.
And
Daniel, yes, yes, surely Daniel. Oh, you say, David? Did you say David? Yeah, I would say that's right. Maybe there's some others. Quench the violence of fire. Who was that? This has to be one specific, he has to be referencing one specific.
Well, you got Shadrach, Meshach.
Okay, Shadrach, I would say that they are, if that's not who they're talking, he's not talking about, who he's referencing there, I don't know who he's talking about. Escape the sword. David escaped the sword. Saul was after his head. Who else maybe escaped the sword? Who just was on the run?
Elijah and Elisha.
Elisha. That's right, Jeremiah. Out of weakness we're made strong. Anybody you think of?
Ehud.
What?
Ehud.
Ehud?
Ehud.
Out of weakness we're made strong. Maybe.
Judges 3:12.
Because he's left-handed? Are you saying left-handed people are weak?
David
Gideon.
and Goliath.
Son.
Yeah, David's just a scrawny little twig coming out of there. Maybe, yeah, let's say David would go to that. Even David, spiritually speaking, did some awful things, and maybe he got weak and then weakened that way.
Hezekiah.
Okay, with the sickness, is that what you're saying?
What's in Isaiah 38:1-6?
Okay, there's a number more there. Became valiant in battle, there's many. Turned to flight the armies, all the judges, David as well. Yeah, if you want to talk more about that, all you gotta do is bring it up, but you guys are gonna have to open your lips and talk if you guys want to talk more about it. But if not, we'll just start at verse 35, okay? And then we're gonna have to finish the chapter, and then we'll get into the questions. So everybody bring your books. I'll do my best to bring my book as well, and we'll have some fun with the questions. All right, thanks everybody.